got 7 advisory members. We're missing Wasim, and I know Mark's out today. All right, let's call the meeting to order. Can I get a motion to open the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Great, and we'll vote on that. Jane?
Aye.
Dan?
Aye.
Natalie?
Aye.
Steve Leahy?
Aye.
Brendan?
Aye.
And
Aye.
I'm also aye. So it is 7:04 p.m. and I am calling to order a meeting of the Sherborn Advisory Committee of Wednesday, January 26th. And we have members present, Jane Matarazzo, Dan Sickle, Natalie Weir, Steve Leahy, Brendan Daly, Peter Galatano, myself, Stephen Tsai, and then actually Wasim Basli has also just joined the meeting. So 8 of us are here. I'm going to begin with reading the agenda. All right, so for today, addition of topics not reasonably anticipated by the chair 48 hours in advance of the meeting. Are there any topics that anybody wants to add? All right, hearing none, we'll then move to liaison reports. And then the fiscal year 23 budgets for the inspectors, recycling, transfer station, DPW, and town buildings. And then we will go over the previous meetings minutes, and that's it. Any questions or comments about the agenda? All right. Hearing none, then we'll move right into liaison reports. Do we have any liaison reports from anyone? Dan?
So I was at a capital budget committee meeting last night. Couple things. There's an item for Farm Pond. Jeannie Guthrie couldn't be there, so Sean Colleen was there to describe it. So proposal for new gates at Farm Pond and a little bit of a rearrangement of the gate by the boat ramp in a way that will improve kind of security and also help with groundwater runoff. So wastewater coming down Lake Street won't just flood right down that road. So didn't take a vote, but generally I think CBC was pretty favorably inclined, was the general tenor of discussion. Spent some time updating the 5-year capital budget plan with new information, and then had a bit of a discussion about whether next year and in subsequent years it would make sense to shift the timing of the bulk of CBC's work earlier to like October, November, so that much of that work could be wrapped up before we on advisory really got going on our piece of the budget analysis. So obviously no decisions made about that, but some back and forth discussion around that. And that was a pretty short meeting, it was a half-hour meeting.
Great, thank you. Any other liaison reports?
Steve, I had a conversation with Chief Ward from the fire department regarding capital budget. It was kind of a pre-meeting meeting. And so I won't steal his thunder, but my advice to him and my advice to the advisory meeting is that his requests are prudent, and what he'll come forth with to the capital budget committee is fair and maybe a little convoluted, because it's using, if you recall, the command vehicle last year.
Yes.
We had some value in that stored away in a revolving fund that he seeks to use. And it made perfect sense to me that his business acumen to not trade it in and go to auction, placing that, and again, you may remember I was against using that type of financing because of the higher debt level. We would have had to, free cash or debt, pay for the entire new command vehicle, whereas the old one had value more value on the auction versus trade-in. And he seeks to use that value in his revolving equipment fund for equipment that, to me, humbly made sense. And so again, he just was asking insight, and so it hasn't come before the capital budget committee. But I did have that conversation and did guide him in that way.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Liaison reports? All right, if not, then we will move on to the budgets. First up, we have the inspectors, and I see Christiane is on here. Let me get your budget on screen here.
Hello, hello. Can you hear me?
You can.
Excellent.
Take it away.
All right. So this is hopefully a really easy one. Everything was as guided, except for one field. So the only thing really to talk about, I think, is on the electrical inspector's page. If you want to jump to that, Steve, that would be great. The assistant electrical inspector has been historically very underfunded. We always budget, $800 something or whatever it may be for that position. We tend to have to use the guy quite a bit more. So our normal electrical inspector is only obligated to work for the town 2 days a week. And obviously there are projects where waiting until a Tuesday or a Thursday is not feasible. People that have open trenches, people that have emergency electric service repairs, the town doing the Pine Hill parking lot or the school. So we tend to use the backup wiring inspector to cover the times when it's sort of out of the normal inspector's schedule. And it seems to work fine. The only problem is that it's always, we're always pulling out of another pocket to pay the guy at the end of the year because we always go over on the budget. So I tried to account for that for next year's budget and allot him. I think this is 80 inspections worth of pay, which is about. I think last year we did 60 something for him, and the year before that we did a few less. But then back in 19 we did close to 60 something again. So 80 should cover us to continue using him the way that we have been using him, and to not have to be borrowing out of some other line item. And that's my pitch.
Great. Well, that sounds reasonable to me, especially when you look at your 3-year actuals. It's, you're budgeting in line with what you have historically actually been spending. So it makes sense to me. Also, I fully admit that I did not realize your budget had multiple tabs. So when I reviewed your budget, I only looked at this page. I was like, oh yeah,
got
that's
it.
great.
Yeah. The other plumbing one is just straight across with just the 4%, and everything else is flat. So typically we have returned money at the end of the year. Usually we don't necessarily always have everybody using their travel expenses or their training and dues, but
Sure.
Anyway, I would like to be prepared at least in case this is the year that everybody decides to go on that plumbing inspector training vacation.
Yeah.
So.
Right. So my only question when I looked at this page was just this software fees one.
Yes.
I know that that's like a new thing that you started this year, right?
It started like a year and a half ago. Yeah. So it sort of came in the middle of I think, or the end of FY20, and so FY21 was fully using the system, and now we're into the new. We're using it continually now.
And I'm assuming that based on a contract, the price of it has not gone up for.
No, and I was
FY23.
happy about that. I made sure that they were gonna give us the same price for next year, which they agreed to, even though we are getting an upgraded version of it starting in a week or two. So we're gonna have a sort of a new look and a new interface for the public, which will make it a little bit easier to work with.
Okay.
But it has been quite successful. I was just looking at the numbers. In FY21, just over half of the applications came in through the online system. And yet in FY22, it's more like 80% are coming in online. So
That's
it's
good.
really cut down the amount of traffic into town hall and the amount of paper physical records that we're dealing with. And obviously everybody's paying online, which is making it a lot easier for Pam and the folks in the collector's office to deal with it. So.
Okay. And then I'm pretty sure that this is appropriately placed, but just because we are creating a new wide IT budget this year, every department that has anything that's vaguely IT related, I think we're looking at just to see whether it makes sense to move it into the IT budget. But this one seems like specialized software just for you.
Right.
You're the
Yeah,
one who knows
our
what
IT
about
guy
it,
doesn't
so.
even, Kevin, the IT guy that we currently use, doesn't have anything to do with this, and he doesn't want to have anything to do with it. So they have their own support system that they provide to us.
Great. And then how recently have you kind of gone over your sort of like fee structure for all your various departments?
Yeah, the last update I think was 2016, which was right before I started working in town, and we adjusted to sort of line up better with what the other towns around us are doing. Most of the fees are on point. I need to adjust for the next town meeting the sheet metal permit fees, which are quite low compared to the other ones, but that amounts to maybe 5% of the actual permits that we get. It's a pretty small pocket, but anyway, for some reason, you could do $1 million worth of sheet metal work and the permit fee would still be $100. So I'd like to fix that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, other than that, I was again looking at the numbers. FY21, I think we brought in 224,000 overall so far in FY22. So halfway through, we brought in 121,000. So we're right on track, if not a little higher, for the amount of fees. Same thing with number of permits. We're up almost 100 over what we were last year. So it's been busy. There's been a lot of permit action happening,
Yeah.
but I don't think that the fees are like drastically out of line with what any other towns are, and they
Okay.
seem to cover the costs of the department. But
Okay.
it's something we could look at, maybe $1 or $2 here or there,
Yeah.
if it's something that we really want to try to raise revenue.
Yeah, I mean, my only thought is, essentially, inflation obviously is quite famously high over the past year. So if number one, it means that the cost of everything that the town needs is going to be higher. But then number two, if the towns around us are adjusting upwards to keep up with inflation, then I wouldn't want us to fall behind.
Yeah, I mean, part of that just gets picked up by the fact that the fees are based on the value of work, and the value of work is rising. So
Yeah.
what would have been a $40,000 garage 5 years ago is now an $80,000 garage, and so the permit fee is doubled in that amount of time. So we went from a $400 fee to an $800 fee. So because the cost of the jobs are more, the permit fees go up, even though we haven't adjusted anything. It's just because of the cost of wood and labor and everything else. That kitchen remodel you wanted to do is 30% more, while the permit fee is 30% more too.
Okay. Great. Deb?
Oh, yeah, I had just raised my hand when you were talking about the software fees.
Yes.
We're actually presenting that at the Board of Selectmen's meeting tomorrow, and I've been working with Klaus, and fees like this, where it actually belongs to a department who can manage it, are going to stay in that department. The IT budget is going to be more or less for things that affect numerous departments.
Great. Yeah, that was my assumption. But I'm just kind of making a point of asking every time I see something that looks IT like pop up in a budget. So, great. Anybody from advisory have any questions or comments?
I just want to reiterate, Steve, what you and Deb just mentioned, that, you know, for a single department piece of software, keeping that budget item in that department makes perfect sense versus anything that is cross-department, goes to the IT director's budget. Thanks.
Wasn't this software used by other inspecting departments also? I thought that was shared across electrical, plumbing.
Yes, so, right, so this does all the permitting and inspecting record keeping for building, electrical, plumbing. I'm not sure, I've never really understood why we have the separate tabs for the other for the other figures in the department. They're all under the building department. And so the fee, I didn't bother to split out the cost to say that a portion of it goes to electrical and a portion goes to plumbing. But yes, they do utilize that, but I wouldn't consider them another department. It links in with the GIS software that the town uses, that like Sean works with, and that we have for the public to use. So it does tie into that, but it doesn't actually, it doesn't really have any functionality beyond being able to provide data into that system. So it's kind of, no other departments are using it the way we use it. Let's say other departments are certainly looking into it. You know, the assessors have been going into the records now, and they can get all the plans digitally to look at instead of having to come in and take a ruler out in my office to measure the plans. You know, the collectors can go in and look and make sure that things got paid and where the money went, but they're only sort of peripherally using it. So anyway, I hope that clarifies.
And so, Deb, this is a question that if these departments 241, 243, 245 are all aggregated together and their IT expense is in buildings, is that the way we want to account for this, seeing that it is a shared service amongst building, plumbing, and electrical, and possibly others?
Well, as Chris said, it really all falls into inspectors. It's really not being used. I mean, other people reap the benefits, but it's really only used by the inspectors. And Chris is really responsible for, you know, the contract and following the negotiations and things like that. And even though it's 241, 243, 245, those are all within the inspector's responsibility.
Okay, in GAP, and not in GASB, but in GAP, you have to match the revenue with the expense. So if the benefit, the expense of that software is included in plumbing and electrical, and they get the revenue, shouldn't a portion of that expense be allocated to those departments? And you can say no because it's government accounting, and I just don't understand that, and that's fine.
Well, I mean, I agree with you. It would be one more step to allocate between them, but the revenue actually all goes to the town. You know what I mean? The revenue doesn't go to these departments. The revenue goes into the general fund. So there would really be no benefit of splitting it up.
Right, all right, I get that, so thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Chris? All right. Hearing none, then I think we'll close out the inspectors. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we've got recycling. Get this up on the screen here. Charlie, you can take it away.
Yep. Okay, yep. I'm sorry. I just got a phone call. I'll have to call you back though. Okay, hold on. Bye. I suddenly got a bunch of phone calls when I was on. All right, so our this is the recycling committee budget, and what I changed some of the account names to broaden things a little bit this year, and so that's why I shifted the line items to give us a little more flexibility in terms of what we do with our little budget. And what I did was take a lot out of printing and mailing, because we do more than printing and mailing with this budget. For instance, buying promotional supplies, buckets and things like that to keep our food waste composting program going, and other things like that. So buying, I think, for instance, like maintenance supplies and things like that for the transfer station, that sort of thing. Signs for the transfer station as well, which need to be replaced at this point. If you've been there, you can see that. So, but we're level funded otherwise. But the bottom line is level funded.
Great. Well, I like the zero. Clearly, you've just shifted some categories around. But does anybody from advisory have any questions about the recycling?
Just a generalized question. This is Steve Leahy checking in. As far as volume goes, and kind of, are there any increase in the volume that we're seeing in recycling? I'm just curious. Is that a line out with like town growth numbers?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of increases with the food waste recycling. I see it more. That's one thing that's really popular with new residents coming in. In terms of the plastics and the paper has been maddening since COVID. It's really gone up. And the good news about paper is, this is the next budget you're going to be talking about. The good news about paper is that they were charging us for it during the height of the problem with recycling. We're back down to paying zero for that now, because the recycling firm is actually probably making some money when they separate the corrugated cardboard from it. But yeah, it seems like we're hauling a little bit more. I don't have the exact tonnage numbers, but the rate at which the containers go out to the transfer station is pretty amazing.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Any other questions about the recycling budget? All right. Now I think we'll stop this one. Now, let's see. Next up, we've got transfer station.
Yeah, and as I spoke to you, Steve, this really belongs to Sean and his DPW budget, and I'm here for support of that a little bit, because I'm familiar with what's going on with this transfer station too.
Great. Let me get this on screen. All right. Sean, you want to take over for this one then?
Sure. We pretty much level funded this. The only real increase was part of the 3-year contract for the operations. Everything else, we pulled a few things down. It looks like we covered the recycling, and it's anyone's guess what could happen with that market. But if we stay the way we're going, we'll probably cover it again with what we had. So I just rolled that to 60,000. That's about it. No real changes.
I've got no questions about this. Does anyone else from advisory have any questions on the transfer station?
Looks good. Let's move.
All right. Well, hearing no more, then I think I like level funded on transfer station. So let's move on. Let's move on to the DPW. Let's see here.
DPW or buildings?
It's up to you. So whichever one you want to do first.
I don't care.
I've got DPW first on the agenda, so we might
Oh,
as well do
okay.
that.
Not a whole lot to say here either. I pretty much did as asked. Anyone that's wondering, we are in the middle of a union negotiation, so we're not going to talk much about that. What's budgeted is what was in the guidance for all the personnel expenses, so we should probably just leave that at that.
Okay.
The biggest the biggest thing I see in this budget, which I highlighted, no, it didn't show up in color on yours, is the fuel, the gasoline. We're definitely not going to cover this year. We might blow by that this weekend, but you know, we were trending pretty good, but we were trending pretty good on fuel prices up until this year. So now that you see the year-to-date numbers, there you go. You can see that the next time we get a fuel delivery, we're going to blow this year's budget. So it's likely that that's going to be short next year. Again, anyone that remembers that we don't take into account snow and ice when we talk about fuel, even though obviously in my world, heavy winter has a huge impact on that. So it's likely to not cover next year, but we can probably find it somewhere else. We've never supplemented fuel with in a heavy winter, but we could. I think we talked about it a few years ago, but we didn't do anything with it.
John, this is a naive question. So the snow and ice does not include fuel for clearing snow and ice?
Doesn't. And you know, it could. It's not the easiest thing to track. We could. We certainly, if we had a blowout year, and we haven't had one since I was here, but there was some storms, for those that were around a while ago, that we actually got some state funding because we, at least locally, they designated areas as I think it was actually a disaster area. So there was MEMA and FEMA money that came in. So some of that gets wrapped up and you get some fuel charges for that because you get hourly rates for all your equipment on a reimbursement. But at the end of the year, whether the snow and ice absorbs some extra fuel or we're just short on the fuel, it really doesn't make a difference. We're either going to do a supplement to cover the budget being short or not. I mean, it's the downfall of underfunding the snow and ice budget intentionally, which we do every year.
And we're allowed, so is there an advantage to adding fuel to that snow and ice to make the real use of fuel non-weather related is my question, I guess. So if we pull the snow and ice fuel out of here and put it into that special category that we can blow through the budget because the state allows us, would that benefit us, I guess, is my question.
Well, it would never have the same impact as fuel prices.
No, but we have no control over that. All that, we wish an advisory, we could control the prices at the pump. We don't.
I wish you could too.
But just from what the state allows us to do with snow and ice and the portion of fuel, it's just a question to ponder, and you don't have to answer it here, but it may be beneficial to throw a piece of that variable expense of fuel into the snow and ice so that this budget of fuel can purely be cutting grass, running the machines to do what you do.
Right.
Aside from snow and ice.
Yeah, and I'm not against it. I mean, that's why I brought it up. It won't be the easiest thing to account for, but
Yeah, that was gonna be my question, is that, are you actually able to track that, or is it?
Well, I
not?
track every ounce of fuel that goes in the truck. So you could go back and say, well, how much fuel went in your trucks during that snowstorm? So you can get it. I mean, it's a level of how much you have to calculate how much effort you want to spend to basically spend the same dollar.
Right.
You're going to add some administrative effort on my end.
I mean, if you had to make a ballpark guess, what percentage of the annual gasoline budget is actually going towards, gas during snowstorms? Just ballpark, order of
Out of
magnitude.
that budget,
Yeah.
5%.
Yeah, okay. So it's
You got to remember that's police and fire built into that too.
right.
So this 10,000 gallons of gasoline that goes into the police cruisers that's in there, that doesn't, really, there's no effect on that year over year, whether we get snowstorms or not.
Yeah. Yeah. So this number year, the reason why it's high is basically price of gas is going up. It's not because, we have not had a aberrational heavy snowfall year. So I didn't.
Right.
I didn't think,
And we didn't the past two. And we're not even into when, we might get a heavy snowfall year, but we haven't seen that yet. So we're trending ridiculously high compared to last year or the year before, and even the year before that.
yeah. So my question is, does it make more sense to actually just increase your gasoline budget now instead?
It may. It was a month and a half ago when I did this, so it was a little harder to say. I've gotten it was this last warrant, we got a fuel delivery, so I think that was about $6,000 or $7,000 on diesel. So that knocked. I was probably looking at 35 or 36 when I did the budget, and Deb just threw these numbers in, and we're looking at hitting the budget the next time I get a delivery.
As much as I'm not a fan of increasing people's budgets, especially this year when the entire, town's the budget request is, $2 million higher than last year. So, we're trying to cut
I think
back.
it would be more people's
gasoline
comfort level of where the fuel prices are going to be, 18 months from now.
Right.
Right. We know we're going to be short this year.
And to say unavoidable costs, we can't just necessarily cut back on the gas. We are takers in absorbing whatever the price increase is. There's nothing to be done about it.
Right.
You either budget it properly and plan for it, or you don't. But either way, you're still going to get hit with the cost.
Right.
Yeah.
To me, that's part of the right. It's like inflation is 7%. That's hitting the town also, right? We can't pretend like everything isn't costing more money and budget an actual level funded omnibus, right? Like we have to acknowledge the fact that everything's going to cost more, and this is one of those things that's going to cost a lot more.
Would we lose out on state funding if, due to snow and ice or a catastrophic winter, and we didn't have fuel in that snow and ice budget? Is that related, like a relief effort from the state to our costs for snow and ice? Is there a relationship there?
Not at all.
Okay.
The only offset to any of this funding that I have is Chapter 90, which is set out a year ahead of time, which hasn't changed in decades, really. And then if there's a catastrophic storm that causes either the governor or the president to declare a disaster area, at that point, it has nothing to do with your budget. It has everything to do with what you show as actual costs. And it's based on very stringent guidelines for use on your labor overhead and your machines.
Okay, so it has nothing to do with fuel. It's just a low portion of the equipment and labor.
Right, and so this line has everything to do with the advisory, I'd say, and select board being comfortable with where we think we're going to land. I don't think anyone could look at this and say, well, that's probably going to cover it. It doesn't look like it's gonna. The fuel would have to turn around and be back where it was last year for that to work.
Right.
So
I
I left it there. It was kind of silly to leave it at 50, but
Yeah.
I also highlighted it in red and caused us to have this conversation. I'm comfortable with wherever anyone else wants to put it. I'm not an expert on where fuel futures are going to be in 18 months or next month.
Well, how does the rest of advisory feel if we bump that up to say 75,000? Again, it's like Sean is saying, this is a guess as to what fuel costs are going to be in, FY23, which is a long time from right now, but it's surely, if it does back down, it's coming back down that quickly, probably, right? So it does make more sense to budget it. It's that we know that we're going to be using. So,
Steve, my suggestion would be to footnote it, and we would have to squeeze 20,000 from other departments to cover this, so that we're balanced here. So whereas we let other departments slide with maybe only a few $1,000s here or there, that could come back to cover this increased justifiable expense.
The only other thought I might add is that, yes, the fuel is likely to cost more than what's budgeted, but, would there be other areas of the budget where maybe there would be some savings? And, it's budgets are, you can move things around in budgets. So there might be some savings elsewhere that might make it possible to cover that, even if the 50,000 is unrealistic for the fuel itself. So before we just decide that we should increase the budget, I wonder whether first we should consider that, there might be other ways to cover that, even if the 50,000 is not specifically enough for the fuel.
yeah, I mean, I think that is going to be part of our task, right? Is to find the $25,000 elsewhere. But for this line in particular, it's almost like it's a fixed cost, right? It's going to cost what it's going to cost, and you're going to buy gasoline and you're going to put it into our vehicles and you're going to use it. So I would prefer for this number to actually reflect the cost of gasoline in FY23, and if we can be pretty confident it's not going to be 50,000, I would go ahead and bump it up some amount, whatever amount the rest of advisory is comfortable with being like, we're pretty sure it's going to be more than this amount at least, but this will be closer than 50,000, and in my mind, given that through the year, we're almost through our entire budget, it seems like increasing it by 50% is still conservative. I think, Peter, I get your point about footnoting and being like, all right, now we have to try to find it somewhere. Part of it is I don't know that I will remember that footnote. Maybe you will, but I would prefer.
Sean will. Sean has to.
That's why I would just prefer that it go in there, and then in whatever is the next update of the budget model from Deb, that's going to be built into it, and we'll just see the fact that the entire omnibus has gone up by 50,000, and we've got to work on getting it back down some other way, if we can, as opposed to trying to remember by public hearing that, oh wait, remember we told Sean that we were going to increase that gas line did we do that? I'm too scatterbrained to be able to remember that. That's just,
So I think I'd also support the idea of just putting in a best estimate here, and then realizing that because this and other expenses are going up because of inflation and other factors out of control, we need to be especially diligent looking at the rest of the budget.
I would agree with that, and would just make note that, remember, on this gasoline, as Sean pointed out, this is not just gasoline. While this number falls under DPW, he is purchasing gas for the other departments as well here.
And this is certainly, this is the type of thing where in all the budget discussions up to now, they're smaller departments, and I'm sitting there scrutinizing their $500 here, $2,000 there, and you're like, why are we harassing people for $2,000, especially when they've already come in level funded, right? They've come in level funded, and I see that there's a line where they've historically been a few $1,000s under their budget, and I'm still asking them, hey, can we have that $2,000? Well, it's so that we can do things like, oh, okay, we know that gas is going to go up. We're going to be $50,000 over budget on gas. So this is the type of thing that I'm trying to put those little bits and pieces towards. And I don't know that we've actually taken anything meaningful out of anyone's budget yet. So we have to try harder moving forward, I think. But, I think the gas is going to cost more. So we should put an accurate number for the budget.
Well, advisory mulls over that 20 grand. Sean, not to touch upon the salaries, wages, and benefits because they're in negotiation, but does your budget accurately reflect the ask over the current run rate? And if so, that's fine because it's a negotiation. But gosh, it's different.
I don't understand the question.
You have a pretty high increase to salaries, wages, and benefits for fiscal 2023 over the run rate annualized, which means through January 13th, 2022, annualized, it's a significant increase. Is that where we're at in the negotiation?
Yeah, you can't use this fiscal year. I hired 4 new employees. Remember, we went into COVID with 3 retirees in one fiscal year, dropped a department from 8 to 4, bounced it back up to 8. It's at 7 right now. The run rate doesn't reflect anything stable at all.
I guess to follow up on that,
The ask is within 4%.
I remember last year, Sean,
of the budget,
Yeah.
which is the best guess 7 months ago.
Right.
But the actuals are the actuals. But Steve, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm
No,
sorry.
that's all right. I was interrupting you both, but no, I was just asking because I remember last year the staffing situation was in flux, and I just wanted to know. Right now, you had said you were down 3, 4. You hired another 3, 4. Are you, in terms of filling positions, do you have open positions currently, or are they filled at the moment? Are you staffed?
We're pretty much filled. We had brought in 4. We retained 3 of them. So there's basically an open one. I'm not filling it right now.
Okay.
But again, during last fiscal year, we went from fully staffed, higher rate of pay, obviously, because they were retirees going out. We paid them out. Then we went several months during the pandemic with just 4 employees in this past fiscal year, and then, brought in 4 new. So
Were those 4 people in this fiscal year?
Yeah.
Roughly. You don't
No,
have to do this.
they were hired in October.
Okay, so July, October, there's
Right.
a quarter that we missed. So
Right.
that would not be reflected in the actuals, which
Right.
would knock off 25% of the ask because you have to bake that into the run rate.
Yeah, the run rate.
I'm just curious, that makes sense. And again, if you're backfilling those positions and they started later, the year-to-date number has to be adjusted to forecast what we have been spending this year to what we hope we will spend next year, given the negotiations.
Right. And the run rate doesn't capture any overtime for snow and ice yet.
Well, you have overtime.
My actuals aren't there yet.
Right, but you have budgeted something.
I know, but you're trying to compare it to actuals before the snow starts. So what do you think
I see.
Saturday's gonna cost? What do you think Saturday's actual is gonna be versus a Saturday when we don't work?
No, it's not gonna, so it's gonna move off to the coastal Labrador. They're fooling us. They're fooling us.
Right, so we'll save a
No,
lot
I
of
see your
fuel.
point. I see your point. We're not in winter yet, so it's not.
My guys make a lot of money in February.
And we thank them for clearing the snow.
Sean, one question, just because it jumps out. Street lighting, you went from 26,000 down to 10,000.
Yeah, that's a great story, and I wish I could take all the credit for that. So Gino Carlucci got us.
Oh wait, is this the LED
grant.
bulbs?
For anyone that doesn't know, I'll go through this briefly. We bought all of our streetlights. I was a little nervous about this. We paid $1 for them, all 136 of them. So we bought them from Eversource so we could then apply for the grants to replace them. As soon as you buy them, which was a shocker to me, the rate dropped by much more than 50%. Because, you know, the rate you're paying when Eversource owns them includes maintenance and the electricity. So they immediately dropped what we were paying. That went on until about a month ago. We got a grant, we replaced the lights. Now the rate's going to drop even more because it'll be based on the, you know, the kilowatt hours you're actually using. So they're all LED now. So I don't know exactly what that's going to be. And I don't know what we need to carry then for maintenance. But I think this is a pretty good conservative number.
Okay.
And I never would have guessed we would have saved that much yet already.
It looks like an error. That's why.
I know it did. And in fact, I think we've saved enough already this year on the first decrease to cover the install. And again, the fixtures themselves were pretty much paid for by a grant. So it's a big savings.
That's good. All right, anybody else have questions about DPW?
Maybe I should have kept that savings and put it towards fuel.
Yeah, I was gonna say, can we bring that just, if we can just make the streetlights free, that'll pay for the fuel, right?
I've got no question. I've got no questions on this budget, Sean. I just had a follow-up question because, as you said, you know, you're blowing through the gas budget right now already for this fiscal year. Are there any other raw materials that you expect to use in the spring and summer for this fiscal year for which there's been a noticeable increase that we should kind of prepare ourselves to see, or not significant enough that it'll be a big deal?
In DPW?
Yeah, for like asphalt, road repair, anything that you're prepping to do with this year's budget in the spring and early summer?
Not really in the operating budget.
Okay.
Right, and the ask on the capital side is basically going to be the ask. It may buy less miles of road.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know exactly where that's going to shake out, and obviously asphalt's greatly affected by price of crude oil. So that'll affect that. There's not a whole lot in the operations. It might be in town buildings, depending on where the kilowatt prices end up with electricity. Fortunately, we get that somewhat supplemented by a locked-in price by the solar panels on the garage, but that doesn't buy everything. And natural gas is going up, so that's gonna. I can't really account for that because I don't know where that's gonna land, but we're not there yet either.
I did want to cycle back and just kind of like ask advisory. It seems like there is at least majority support for increasing the fuel number from 50,000. I had thrown out 75,000. I pulled that number out of thin air. There's no data backing that up, but I wanted to see if anybody had any thoughts or was a different number to move that to.
I'd actually like to see, Sean, if you could do like, I know you're not into gas futures, but if you could do your best guess We try to get as accurate as we can.
You want me to guess? I can tell you exactly how many gallons I think we're gonna use of fuel. You can guess what the price is gonna be in 18 months. That's not my forte. I did the best I could to buy fuel when it was falling through the floor when the pandemic started, but that came back to bite me about 3 months later. I have no idea where it's gonna go.
Sean, suppose fuel prices just stayed where they are today. How much would the budget have to go up?
That I don't know, and I can't do it. I can't
Yeah, okay. I mean,
do it offhand.
that'd be one plausible way to do it.
I mean, I can throw that back. I mean, it would be relatively easy for me to get. Again, I can't do it the second.
Of
Because I
course.
crashed the computer trying to do it.
Yeah. of
Our
course.
gallons of usage have been relatively stable the past handful of years, more stable than I thought they were gonna be, because I knew we'd be talking about this. But of course, a relatively stable price within the past couple of years turned into not so much at all. So, I mean, if we want, I can go back and see what if we future out next year's usage based on the past couple and the price where it is, I can get you that. But we can look at the run rate right now and tell, without winter even hitting yet, we're there. We're 4,300 from hitting the budget already. And all I did was, 50 last year was basically the 3-year average plus a little. So.
I guess my thought is that I'm okay with being somewhat too low. I don't want to be so close that we risk being budgeting significantly too much money for gas. So that's why I kind of, just looking at the current run rate, I'm like, okay, well, it looks like you're probably going to need $100,000 in gas, but I didn't want to just go in there and pencil in 100,000 for FY23. So that was my thought process.
So I may have missed something. If we were budgeting trend, we're well over trend because of the unit cost. I think that was the essence of this discussion. Or is there increased volume of gas use that we didn't anticipate this year and was not there in prior years? Or is it just price? The price went from $2 to $4 a gallon, and it is what it is.
It's much more price. There's always some fluctuation, especially on the diesel usage in the winter. But the past few years, it's not that much. It's certainly not enough to significantly hit that.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Well, what do you think? Should we just pencil in 75, or should we have Sean go back to the drawing board, crunch some numbers, and come back at us with a number that has some kind of... My hesitation with that is just that I don't want to have to go through another discussion. I mean, it's not uncommon for us to have to reschedule the large departments like DPW, fire, police to come back again. But if we can avoid it, I would prefer to avoid it. This is not something that we are allowed to discuss over email. Like, if we want to do it again, Sean's got to come back into another meeting. We have to do it in a meeting.
I don't think we need to discuss. I think we just need the number. I think we can all decide if we're in agreement that we want an estimate that's closer to what we think, our best guess is, and then put that number in, and that's the number that we vote on in the hearing.
I agree. If we openly and notoriously decide that this number is too low and increase it, we'll work with that for the rest of the budget process.
Okay, sounds good. Is that okay with you, Sean? Essentially, you come up with a number. Obviously, he's not right. So you come up with a number that you are comfortable with based on your actual fuel usage. And we'll just put that into the budget for the public hearing.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions about the DPW budget? All right, now, this is my bad because I didn't specifically ask you about capital, Sean, but you had mentioned it, but do you have DPW capital items that you're prepared to talk about today?
No,
Are there
I can-
going to be?
yeah,
Do you, okay. So I think I guess we'll schedule it for another meeting then to do capital.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think, Dan, help me out. Was it the 8th? You guys were scheduled?
Give me a second. Yeah, I think it's the 8th. Let me just double check here. Yeah, so capital budget's gonna meet on February 8th.
Okay.
And these intimately entwined, and I may make that capital budget meeting with the on-site insight report, which was refreshed 2 years ago, and there was an attempt to split out the capital portion from the operating portion based upon their recommendations. So this budget for town buildings would be the operating budget items that on-site touched upon. And I remember last year, they didn't touch upon everything because there's certain maintenance things that they didn't touch upon that were fixed kind of costs or variable costs. They were just looking at the structure of the buildings. So from my perspective, it'd be interesting to see what on-site insight called for improvements, either below our capital or above our capital, and then what the actual budgets are. And I don't know, Sean, if you made that distinction between those spreadsheets that we had with pivot tables that you could do by building and by project and by year and by capital and non-capital, and then tie that back to, or at least get into the ballpark of how the on-site insight fits into these budgets, both operating and capital. And that was a big ask, but I'll ask it.
So I'm not, we basically held the operating budget as it was for this year. And I'm still analyzing what the ask should be for this year on the capital. This is probably, it's no secret, this is a horrible year to try to do anything. So we're trying to hold what we would have been doing, but there's certain things that are nearly impossible to get completed right now. So we need to kind of keep moving forward. But there's some fresh endeavors I don't foresee happening in this year. But that doesn't mean we shut it off and start afresh.
No,
so there will be a building aspect. We're not going to overanalyze the capital versus the operating budget. I pretty much left the operating budget pretty lean as it was. Again, I'm nervous about the utilities, but that has really nothing to do with the capital ask anyway. And the equipment on the DPW side, we're going to be really light on, if at all. Of course, there's roadways. We can't not put anything in that because that's spent now. And this year, we need to come back for tree funding because we've exhausted that.
No, and I'll help with the analysis on the on-site insight picture. And again, it was a snapshot a few years ago of what should happen 20 years from now. And I agree, and I think everyone has seen it in practice, the supply chain bottlenecking, and you can't get what you want. Even if you have the money, you just can't get it. So it's that balance of what we can accomplish in terms of operations, and those things are ongoing, the routine operating costs, plus the incremental operating costs that fall below capital. And then those capital items, which just in a brief glance were garage doors for some building, and it was a few other things for other buildings. And they may be pushed off, but it would be good to at least track what Onsite Insight had said we should be doing somewhere over the next 20 years, whether we pushed it off or whether it was accomplished or whether we did it by ourselves.
Can I just add one thought about Onsite Insight? I totally agree with you that tracking is, or more or less, is a good idea. But the complication, I think, with Onsite Insight is that we have I won't call it arbitrary, but the town of Sherborn has just decided that 10,000 is kind of the amount for capital. But if you look at the Onsite Insight report, there are many things on there that are less than $10,000, but you would probably characterize them as capital. In other words, by their nature, they last multiple years. So they really are sort of capital expenditures, even though they happen to cost $10,000. So the town of Sherborn doesn't consider them to be quote unquote, capital expenditures or the kind of capital expenditures that require review by the capital expenditures committee. So I don't think it's as simple as saying if it's under 10, if it was on Onsite Insight and it's under 10,000, then it should be operating. And if it's over 10,000, it should be capital, because you really kind of have to go line by line and really look at what they're talking about and say, yeah, but is that really an operating expense or is that really a capital expense? And that's kind of a lot of work that, I would hate to put on Sean if he feels like he's got a good sense of what he needs for capital, without going through each line item like that on the Onsite Insight. I'd be willing to go with his, his judgment rather than ask him to do that line by line.
Jane, I agree as always and disagree this time. The disagreement is there's specific definitions on capital, and that's government accounting standards. And we have to define what we consider capital and stick with it. Then from the particular projects, which, yes, Onsite Insight could nicely slot into year 1, year 2, year 3. It may, in realistic aspects from Sean's perspective, take 3 years to get one project done. So how do you fund that across fiscal years when the project is agnostic to fiscal years? But capital's capital, and Deb, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we have to stick to a specific accounting standard on what's capital, and not that we don't have flexibility within how we describe things as capital, because we can aggregate things as capital. Like if you buy 100 computers, that could be capitalized. If you buy one computer, that doesn't have to be capitalized. And so there's some flexibility we have.
I might jump on before Deb does. The funny thing about that is Deb would probably and may very well follow me up with her auditors are going to tell you 25,000 is capital.
Well,
so
I think you have to differentiate between accounting capital and your process for spending capital. I mean, accounting is accounting and we have standards, but I think what Jane was referring to is how you're going to determine how you're going to spend the capital money. And if it's between an operating expense or a capital expense, eventually it all comes out of the same bucket. It's all town money, and you have to determine, what bucket you want it to come out of. For accounting purposes,
That's cash accounting. I get that from the government, and I'm learning that. It's more the accounting perspective that, again, I've been whipped and beaten to follow those accounting standards that you define it and you follow it, regardless of where the cash comes, ebbs or flows from. And so just for better understanding for everyone, so that we can segregate what goes where, when, and then find the funding for it, either free cash, borrowing, exempt, non-exempt, or out of the operating budget, is really part of this process.
Okay, I admit I didn't 100% follow this discussion that we've just had.
No, Steve, it's very technical. I don't blame you, and because
I'm like,
we have
so now
three
what?
different sources of information. We're aggregating them. We're trying to use it as best as possible to provide the service and keep the tax rate down. And it's not easy. It's complicated. Yeah.
I mean, the overall story that I'm hearing from Sean is that it's not a year where he is going to be proposing to do a great deal of major capital projects, and his operating budgets seem to reflect not a year of giant expansion, and we'll wait and see what his capital request is going to look like. But I do think, and essentially, I think you've said this is not the year for us to continue the discussion of do these things belong in operating or capital. But I do think that is a discussion that remains relevant and important to have. I can't say that I'm sad that we're not going to talk about that for an hour and a half right now, but I do think that conversation is coming maybe next year.
We can have it this year, just not tonight.
Yeah, I guess when you come at us with your capital requests, I think that also I guess it doesn't help us to draw this division between capital and operating. But if we do get the capital stabilization or whatever it's going to be called, I'm assuming that at least some of your projects in the long run are going to be coming out of that stabilization fund. And does that help at all in terms of the categorization of things, or is that really only just help you in not having to tie projects to certain town meeting years?
That's where I started every conversation last year. So yeah, it certainly would. I just didn't think this was the year we'd be digging into that.
No, I mean, I think
we
that
can.
we're laying the foundation of it, I think, right? I mean, the basic idea, I mean, to me is like, a couple of years ago when this started, is like, at the end of the day, it costs a certain amount of money to run the town, right? It costs a certain amount of money to maintain the buildings, especially so that we aren't letting them fall into decay and disrepair, and then spending even more money in a cyclical fashion with $500,000 capital projects to do stuff that was long overdue, right? So we're trying to avoid that, and we have to acknowledge that things are going to cost a certain amount. I think that the on-site insight refresh was one of the steps in trying to figure out, okay, this is going to be the cost of maintaining our buildings according to these professionals that we have paid a lot of money to analyze all of our buildings, right? And I think the next step is now going to be, all right, how are we going to proceed strategically with funding and maintaining our buildings in the way that these consultants that we paid for are saying that we should. again, I'm happy to not have that conversation right now, but I do want to make sure that everybody recognizes that that's a conversation that's coming, and that we should all continue thinking about it.
Yeah, I think we can almost replay some of the conversations from last year. I don't think it's changed much,
Yeah.
except for the ability to do it. I mean, me and Peter spent a lot of time looking at it last year. A bunch of us did, and we spent a lot of time talking about it. We couldn't really make it fundamentally work. So I'd welcome that.
And a challenge going forward is the cost assumptions within on-site insight doesn't reflect the current inflationary period, whether transitory or not. Some inflation is here to stay, and then some inflation is not what they anticipated over the next 20 years. So,
Well, the refresh is supposed to happen every 5 years, right?
Yeah,
I mean, we have to pay
it
for it every
certainly
time.
can. I wouldn't if that 5 years was coming up next year, I wouldn't do that.
Right.
Peter
But
lost
it's
me
co-
at that transitory comment.
But it's coming up in 3 years.
It's gotta settle down, and nothing's gonna settle down this year.
Right.
At least not in the building trades, and
Right.
there's certain
So-
things that are fine. There's certain things that we have no idea where they're gonna land.
Right. So I think it is prudent to not try to come up with a long-term plan that has a lot of specifics, especially on, the amount of time and money it's gonna take to do things right now, because
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just for a good example, I've talked for probably 2 years to do gutters on the police station. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but it was something that was held off from the day they built it. So for 20 years, the building hasn't had gutters. We had an EMT almost, break her head falling because the front walk iced up. The building has taken a hit not having gutters. So this was the year I was finally going to do it. An architect spent a fair amount of time drawing some plans, specs. I just about had it out to bid. I talked to 2 people that I very much trust in the industry that weren't going to bid on it, but could help me with an engineer's estimate. And they both said, don't even think about it. Don't even do it. You're going to pay 2.5 times what you should, and it won't be done till next year anyway. You can't get metal. You can't get colored metal. Nobody's going to come in at a reasonable price, and you won't even get bids. So it's not even a market. Some of this work can be done. So it's hard to even analyze what the effects are. The assumption is some of this is going to come back to reality. But it's hard to spend any time on real numbers and even a schedule of what we can do with certain things that just don't have to be done. And it kills me to say that, because I like to stay on a timeline of certain progression, but
All right. So let's.
transitory
we-
comment was a dig at the Fed.
oh no, I got it.
They
I knew
changed,
exactly what you meant.
and so where does that leave us? We don't know.
Here's one factoid I can toss in, coming back to our earlier conversation. Sean, I looked up gasoline futures, and from now through next January, wholesale prices are supposed to drift down about 20 cents a gallon, if that's helpful. Those futures prices may be right, may be wrong, but that's what financial markets are betting on, is about a 20-cent decline in wholesale, 20 cents per gallon decline in wholesale prices through next January. For what it's worth.
That's
By
depressing.
futures. Digest.
So do you want to use that?
That's going to be awfully high.
Yeah, that's a depressing number, really.
Yep.
But yeah, good news.
I mean, down a little bit, but not a huge amount.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm guessing that would put the number in the budget at something like 90,000, right? It's not great. Yeah. I mean, I would say, John, crunch some numbers, don't go over 100,000. Put a number in there. Just don't clear 100,000 on it. Okay.
All right, it's 89.5, but I'll get back to you next week.
Yeah. Can we close out the discussion on the DPW budget? We've been drifting, bouncing back and forth with town buildings, just, because obviously Sean's in charge of both, but they are separate budgets. So I just want to make sure that we're talking about them separately. So does anybody have any more DPW budget specific questions or comments? All right, I'm going to pull up the town buildings budget. See if there's anything worth talking about that we didn't already cover. Let's see. Right, so this was one, I looked at your bottom line here and I didn't actually go through line by line. It just kind of said, wow, he's decreasing his town buildings budget, which I found, well, I want to know how you did that.
How did I do what?
How did you decrease your town buildings budget by 0.76%?
I cleaned up a handful of things. I did what I was told. The biggest and really only significant increase was water testing, which is just so everyone knows that may or may not cover it. The DEP has mandated that we test monthly now on any well that has a higher than the reporting limit of PFAS. Town Hall's well, of course, has a high level of PFAS, or at least enough that we have to test it every month. We may or may not spend the money to put a treatment system in, and actually we could save the money on testing by doing a treatment, but we'd have to spend some capital money. It's not that significant, so we're not sure where that's going to land at the moment, but that's the realistic number right now for what we're spending on testing. It's stupidly expensive. Most everything else I just cleaned up where we hadn't been spending. Again, we haven't spent the time to knock a bunch of items out of this budget that just kind of were originally certain things were split out by buildings. We had kind of jumbled some around. Remember last year we added the library into this budget?
Yeah.
Some of their operating expenses. We won't see any of those operating expenses, unfortunately, this fiscal year, sadly. But we got to cover them for next year. Those are, again, estimates. Fairly close estimates. The schedule now looks like we'll be in for the full fiscal year. So the inspections and certain other things will come up during this planned fiscal year now at the library.
So Sean, this is row 23 there, the library building maintenance, right?
23?
Yeah, that's the row we're talking about, town building, library building maintenance.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what I had raised my hand about. So, sorry, can you repeat that? So noting that this is the fiscal budget for 23, it's not expected that there will be building maintenance needs in fiscal year 23. And I don't mean to get into a whole discussion about the library, but so your expectations and your budgeting is that there won't be any cost for maintaining the library, which I would assume to mean is likely not going to be open, or your assumption is not open.
Or is it just because everything is going to be under warranty in that year?
Right. It'll be a year into it. Well, I covered a few things down below.
We did? Okay.
If you,
Yeah,
so item
Alarm
41,
maintenance, yeah.
I have 41 for the library elevator maintenance. It's not
Okay.
really, we call it maintenance inspection. Every year the state's gonna come through and do an inspection, so that'll probably come due during the fiscal, because it'll probably be this fiscal they'll actually commission the thing.
Okay,
So
sorry, I had not picked up on those library expenses further down. I thought that row 23 was an all-encompassing maintenance number.
Yeah,
My
no, the single line, that's kind of a carryover from, that would almost be like a miscellaneous line. I'm
Okay.
trying to make some of those go away in this budget, but again, you can't
If I
encompass
remember-
everything in a single line item.
If I remember correctly from last year, the various bits and pieces that we took out of library budget and put into yours, probably totaled up in somewhere on the order of $20,000, I think, right? So.
I think so.
Because
It was about 6 or 8. It was probably 8 lines that they had estimated. And again, some of them we just matched up, right? We figured the town hall's elevator annual inspection would be, about the same as the library. They have a bunch of fire extinguishers, etc. The fire alarm's going to need an inspection every year.
Yeah, so there's about $10,000 worth of kind of maintenance-y stuff, and then 8,000 in heating and fuel, and I guess electricity is quite a bit higher, but.
Yeah, again, I have no idea what that thing's going to consume for electricity. Again, if you try to compare that to town hall, remember the town hall is more than 50% on the electricity side, supplemented by DBW solar panels. So it's not a good, it will use more electricity than town hall, just by the fact that it's not getting that re-rate.
So Sean, looking at the on-site insight, is there any connection to this budget to some of the projects they have? And I'll be specific, in DPW, there's CO detectors and ventilation for $3,000. Police station gets 12 grand worth of computers, crack fill and sealant for fire station 1, just to name a few. Are any of those contemplated given the market challenges that you have?
Yeah, but again, I didn't go through the trouble of trying to put those back in because we really didn't get there last year. So I didn't analyze that back into this budget. I didn't think this was the year to throw 25% more into this budget right now, the way it sits. And I'm making up the 25%, but
total operating was only 50 grand from on-site insight. And if you take out the town hall campus landscaping, which is library and town hall, that brings it down even less. So it was a small operating piece. And again, the question was, are there any projects that could be done that the experts suggested?
Again, there are. I didn't push them into this. This year, we've kind of been going off of utilizing the capital that we had. And again, I've had my head stuck inside that library for the past 18 months trying to get the campus back together. So the focus hasn't been much on crack sealing at the fire station or some of those other things.
Well, then let me ask it a different way. The projects we had before the town meeting, are those progressing to completion or are they partially complete?
Most of them are not. Again, so the gutters on the police station are one we have ready to go, and we tapped the brakes on. Most of all the effort was put into the town, the town hall campus. The second half of the year, other than some big projects, but the big projects were the fiscal year before, like the fire station siding, roofing, some others, and then there's a few more on the town hall that are kind of just sitting. The roof on the town hall still needs to get done, but that was going to coincide with some energy grants, so it's kind of on pause at the moment. Still needs to get done.
So the benefit is we have voted on the capital expenditure, and the project plan's just elongated. So you didn't
Correct.
lose, I believe you didn't lose that money if we voted on a capital project that last year, the year before, though not completed, you can still complete it based upon the funds that were voted. So that's good.
Right.
The only other thing, if this makes you feel any better, is that although the town buildings budget is going down slightly from last year, if you look at the comparison to the 3-year average, there's actually a lot of room there. So I guess, there is room to do some additional, there's room to do more than what has been done over the 3-year average, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right, and from all conversations, we want to give the department heads the flexibility to react to the market. If things are too expensive, don't do it. If it's just right and there's a value proposition, do it. But the funds are there, and the town meeting, advisory, select board, department heads all agree that that's the approach we should take going forward.
John, I've highlighted a couple things here. I just wanted to get your thoughts. So looks like elevator service and maintenance, you're blowing your budget on all of those lines this year. Also the alarm maintenance, you're dramatically blowing your budget on some of these things. So what are those things that have happened this year, and are next year's budgets still going to be accurate?
Unless I'm reading your columns right, I have a $6,500 budget, and I've spent $4,668. Is that blown?
Well, I mean, that's the run rate, right? So, I mean,
well, yeah, I don't fix the elevator every month. I fix it when it either breaks or they do the inspection. So that may be the total.
Okay.
But then and again, this is kind of the difficulty when we split each building to a certain thing, because one year the state inspector will walk through, look at an elevator and go, all right, you're at the service life of the battery backup or something, and it's expensive, and it's the fire station. Then 2 years later, it's the town hall. But all in all, it kind of goes up and down.
Okay.
And alarm maintenance is somewhat the same. We did have a catastrophic failure of something at one of the fire stations, and I got to look at why that number's so high. It was a third of that just on one panel, and it wasn't enough to hit the insurance company, and we're not sure why it failed. It was a relatively new system, which was unfortunate, but it was far enough. It was out of maintenance, out of warranty. So the thing, they kind of come and go.
Okay. So you're still comfortable with the numbers that you have in the FY23 budget?
Relatively. I'm never really all that comfortable with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, usually if it's gonna blow it completely, then it'd be a $20,000 fix on an elevator, and that should be coming out of capital, right? Or if it's I don't want to say a lightning strike because we would claim that, but some other catastrophic failure would be
right.
It would rise to the capital.
Yeah.
So sometimes it rattles the budget a little bit in one line, but it comes out somewhere else.
And then this line, is this the allocating those conference rooms for hybrid meetings? 11,000 in town hall new equipment.
No, that's being captured somewhere else. And not in an operating budget right now. That was
'Cause I thought that was also covered by grant or something, wasn't it?
well, there is a grant, and then there's some other IT equipment that you're going to hear about in the next few weeks, I think.
Well, this 11,000 is for the charging station.
Ah, okay. Wait, wasn't that covered by grant too?
There, I don't believe all the expenses were were covered by the grant.
Okay.
I thought they were.
You'd have to check with Gino. I don't know. This is how the invoice was processed. So I'm assuming when it was processed, you knew what you were doing.
I didn't put that there, but that's next year's budget. No, I'm sorry. You're right. That's in this year's budget.
Yeah, this is this. Sorry,
Okay.
because
No,
we're so
well,
long
I
here.
think-
This
okay.
The
All right.
vendor,
Yeah, but either way, I didn't budget that for next year.
Right.
I'm sorry.
just
Again, I'm
wondering
looking
what
at
that
I'm looking
was.
at your screen, so I'm looking at the wrong columns.
So Deb, charging stations for electric vehicles or?
Yeah, that-
iPhones?
Yeah, we got two of them. There's
that
two charging
charging,
stations at town hall parking lot.
So
Yep.
what's the excise tax increase if all citizens buy a Tesla? That's the question. So maybe that should be the charge at the town meeting.
By the way, Peter, if you had come in the past month or so, you could have got a couple of free charges in there.
On my iPhone? I don't have
Your
that.
on your Tesla.
That'll charge your iPhone really
Uh.
fast. Okay, so those are charging stations. All right. Those are the only things that caught my eye as being things that seemed out of line in terms of actuals or your run rate. So it all makes sense to me. Right. So then, so you are going to have a capital projects, right, for town meeting, for town buildings, but you haven't figured out exactly all the things you're going to put into it, and therefore the sum total that you're going to be requesting.
Right.
Okay. All right. Does anybody have any questions or comments relative to the town buildings budget? Okay. Well, I commend you for coming in not only under guidance, but actually below last year's budget. But I'm anticipating the other shoe is going to drop in a future year. Hopefully when I'm not on advisory anymore, and you can ask for all the money you want. All right. I think, is that the last budget? Yeah, that's the last budget we've got. Okay. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
Okay, previous meeting minutes. I did want to bring up the January 12th minutes again. Remember we had that question about the cemetery asking for 7,000 versus 3,400, and we decided that was a mistake, that it wasn't 7,000, it was 3,400. But and then Deb, I know you emailed me like a day or two afterwards with saying that, oh no, wait, actually I think it was 7,000. Can you explain that?
yeah.
So because if we need to adjust if we need to amend these minutes, then we should do that tonight as well.
Yeah, they're actually coming in $7,000 over their budget from last year. But what happens is they encumbered funds, and they encumbered $3,600 to be spent this year. So in Vadar, when you encumber funds, it just gets added to the budget. So when you look at the report actually adds that $3,600 to the budget column. So that's why when you'd say their forecast versus their budget, it only looked like the $3,400 because it was subtracting the $3,600 that they encumbered. But if you look at what was approved at town meeting, it's truly $7,000, if that makes any sense at all. It's really just in the way Vadar accounts for encumbered funds.
And that's excluding all of the expenses related to the revolving fund? The revolving,
Yeah, no, it had nothing to do with the revolving fund.
okay, town expense, thank you.
So at the end of the day, then, are they
So-
actually asking for 7,000?
Yes, they are actually
Yeah.
asking for $7,000 above their approved budget from last year.
Okay. So then we should actually re-amend these minutes back to
Mhm.
Brendan's original version.
That's correct.
All right. Brendan, I'm sorry that we ever doubted you. Also, in my scatterbrainness, I forgot to ask anyone to take minutes. I don't suppose anybody's
I've been
been.
taking notes. I can do them.
Okay, thank you, Brendan, your lifesaver. Zoom does also very conveniently come up with like an audio and generated transcript of the meetings. So if it's helpful at all for you to have that transcript in case there's gaps, I can send that to you. Just let me know. But
Please redact many of my comments.
all right, so first then, can I get a motion to amend the minutes for January 12th, 2022, back to the original 7,000 and as shown on screen currently?
So moved.
Second,
All right, let's take a vote. Jane,
Aye.
Dan,
Aye.
Natalie,
Aye.
Brendan,
Aye.
Peter,
aye,
Wasim,
Aye.
and Steve Leahy. And I'm also an aye, so that's unanimous. Okay. And now we will bring up the draft minutes for January 19th. And I apologize, I have not actually read these yet, so I'm going to kind of read these on screen as we're discussing, but if anybody else has already read them and has any edits, please go ahead and speak up.
Jane, you had comments. Sorry, I didn't get a chance to like revise and resend, but you had a comment about the schools, right? I think you said not
was-
all the positions. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just a small thing, Wasim. It's not that none of them were in the original school budget, because some of them were. So we might want to just say some of these were not in the original school budget.
Yeah, thank you.
if the minutes were to reflect the capital definition under the bullet points of the free cash discussion, I believe it was. It had $100,000 as a threshold. Bullet number 3, intended for terms. Hold on, intended for terms.
Items that have a lifetime of 5 years or less.
Or less than $100,000. I thought that the intent was for capital replacement, which was a lifetime of 5 years or greater than 10,000, which is the definition that we use for capital. And am I reading that wrong? I'm seeing too many zeros?
No, Peter, you're reading that correctly. I think the thought here was not that this was a capital stabilization fund for all capital items, but rather to smooth out and use it for smaller capital items. So the 100K is meant to identify smaller capital items, larger capital items. The expectation would be that this stabilization fund would not be funding those, and those would be funded in the other more typical types of ways. So the language maybe here could be cleaned up, but that was the intention.
I see.
So leave it.
Right.
Leave it.
So the
Then
idea then is like, if we need a new fire truck 10 years from now, and which costs $1 million, and we happen to have $1 million in this stabilization fund, that would not be an intended use for this stabilization fund.
I mean, I guess we'd have to be very, very precise about what are the actual rules written for the fund. But with the conception that Mark and Heidi and I had, that $1 million truck would be funded either through debt or some other mechanism. And that's not what this fund was meant to smooth out capital spending for the very predictable things like, hey, we need a new police cruiser this year. That happens on a very regular cycle. And this stabilization fund could be used for those types of items. Now, there may be other, some of you may have a different vision of what it should be, but that was where Mark and Heidi and I were starting from.
Yeah. At the end of the day,
keep it
the minutes
that
don't need
way.
to. Yeah, I would say that I think as long as Dan, you think that this line is relatively accurate to the sort of brief discussion we had at the last meeting.
Yeah, so I was not at the meeting,
That's right.
but it is consistent with the discussion that Heidi and Mark and I had at the meeting prior to that.
Great. Then I would say that means this is probably an accurate line in the minutes.
Thank you.
Yes, but surely when we do discuss that as a warrant article, we'll have to have a lot of conversation about it.
Yeah, there are many different ways this could go, and the one that we had proposed was a starting point and may not be the best.
Wait, Stephen Petty was not in town for us, right? That was just Dave Clean.
He was elder housing. Stephen Petty.
Yeah, right, because he's up here. Does anyone happen to know? I think it's with an E here, right?
Oh yeah, that's a copy and paste error. Sorry. Yeah, he in the Zoom he had it as with an A, but
Oh really? Okay.
well, in the Zoom, but then I wrote it. I looked, I think, on the website, and it's an E, so I just wrote it as the same way.
Well,
I
in the
assume maybe Zoom
Zoom
was a typo. I don't know.
in the Zoom, I would assume he writes his own name in. On the website, he's not the one writing his own name in, so I guess he knows how to write his own name. Give him the benefit of the doubt. All right. Deb, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I didn't want to interrupt you if you all were reading, but I just wanted to follow up on the elder housing on the windows. I think last week during the conversation, somebody said, oh, is it possible to get a grant? So I did,
Yes.
I did email Dorothea and Gino about trying to get a grant. Gino did a little bit of work looking into it and discovered that there is a possible grant available. So we forwarded some information to Kitty and Stephen, and so hopefully they'll follow up on that.
Okay, good.
And Deb, who is our grant writer? It's not Gino, or did he take on that responsibility?
I don't know that we have a designated grant writer, but Gino does most of the grants.
Okay, because I thought we had a partial position funded and it was to be shared, and then that fell through.
For a grant writer?
Yes.
Are you thinking about the sustainability coordinator?
Oh, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
that person was supposed to write grants, right?
Yeah,
But I mean,
yes, I'm commingling both of those positions.
Yeah. Well, so the sustainability, so Gino and Dorothea are sharing hours collectively being the sustainability coordinator. And so when there are grants that are appropriate for, sustainability type endeavors, then, I think they are the ones that handle the right for that. But they aren't just general use municipal grant writers. So, I think that the police chief and the fire chief and, whoever else, various relevant department heads and or budget makers, I think, at least in recent years, have been going out and finding their own grants that are applicable to their own departments, and writing, the grants themselves. Not, when Zach Ward finds something that he can write a grant for to get, whatever oxygen tanks, he's not forwarding that to Gino and be like, hey, can you write this for me? It's not, that's
no, but
job.
that's good to know in general that we do, and this is proof of concept, that if a question arises, is there a grant? There are two individuals that can answer that question by doing research and finding it, like Deb mentioned about the windows, which is good.
But I think in this case, it's because, a grant relative to windows has energy efficiency ramifications, and therefore it is relevant to a sustainability coordinator. If, I don't know, the whatever, if DPW decided that they wanted to find a grant for, I don't know, purchasing concrete, I don't know that it would be appropriate to ask Gino to write to go track down grants would pay for concrete. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Well, it would be a collaboration because everything goes back to sustainability. If our tax rate goes above $25, the state steps in and usurps the town or whatever they do when we have high tax rates.
But I think sustainability, at least in the way that was created at the town meeting, it's not about economic sustainability. It's about ecological sustainability.
It's all the same, Steve. It is all the same, honestly.
I mean, I can accept the argument that at the end of the day, it's all the same, but in terms of what that position was actually drafted to do, I don't believe that anybody in town should be just asking Gino and Dorothea to track down grants for them. That's all I'm saying.
I would be bold and say we should.
Fair enough. All right, continuing.
I don't know if
on.
it should be Gino or should it be the sustainability coordinator? What do you
I don't think
think?
we need to
Peter?
talk about this. We're talking about approving minutes here, so let's get through this.
Thank you. All right, we're done with assessors. Okay, I believe that was the end. All right, any other edits to the minutes? All right, if not, can I get a motion to approve the minutes of the Sherborn Advisory meeting of January 19th, 2022 as edited on?
So moved.
Second,
All right, let's vote. Jane,
aye.
Dan,
I'll abstain since I wasn't at the meeting.
okay. Technically, you're still allowed to vote on them, but
Well, fine. I'm happy to vote aye. You know,
yeah.
that's fine. You know, no problem with that. I just wasn't there.
Yeah, no, it's understandable. But just to be clear, even if you're not at a meeting, you are still allowed to vote on them.
Happy to vote aye. Happy to support this.
Nat,
Aye.
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Wasim,
Aye.
Steve Late,
Aye.
I'm also an aye. Minutes are approved unanimously. Okay, so if nobody has anything else they want to say, can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved. Second.
All right, let's vote. Jane,
Aye.
Dan,
Aye.
Natalie,
Aye.
Brendan,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Wasim,
Aye.
Steve, and I'm also an aye. We are adjourned at 8:56 p.m.
All
Thank you
right.
very
Have a good
much.
night.
Thank you all.
Aye.